Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. We're continuing the top 100 board games of all time lists with number 30 through 21, the 2023 edition. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's talk about the best board games of all time. Starting off with number 30, in this section of the list, we have Wonderland's War. This is a bag-building, combat-centric game where you're going to be going through two different phases. In the first phase, collecting upgrades and chips, and then in the second phase, going into a war, where you have units, you'll be able to fight, pulling chips from your bag, getting special abilities, and then using them to earn points, building castles, and you'll do this for 3 rounds to try to get the most amount of points, completing objectives along the way. Now, my favorite part about this game, though, is actually that first half of the game where you're going to be collecting powers and abilities for your bag. When you do this, you're going to choose one of these cards, and it's a one-way path mechanism where you can go as far as you want, take a card, but if you make it all the way back to the head of the table, you do get to refresh all the options and then continue moving, but you'll have to take a penalty of negative points and potentially more bust chips during that actual war phase. So there's a bit of decision when it comes to choosing which cards based on what's out there or trying to go for specific combo pieces. I also love the composition of the cards. They have different chips that you can add to your bag, new Wonderlandians, which give you unique chips that no other player can have, or special miniatures, fighters that can go into the area, or you can also gain more units that you summon onto the map, or objectives, upgrades. There's a lot of choices, so when you see something, you immediately get those effects, and then you get to see them in practice right afterwards in that war phase. I love this build-up of powers and abilities, and then seeing how those dominoes fall in that second portion during the war phase. That's my number 30 new to the list. That is Wonderland's War. My number 29, number 65 last year, is Cloudspire. This is a MOBA tower defense style game where you have a base and you're sending your minions and heroes to the enemy base to try to destroy it. You'll have a unique faction with special powers and abilities, gaining units every single round that are going to get stronger and stronger, and then also being able to build your fortress to gain powers and abilities. There's solo, co-op, 2-player. My favorite way is definitely the 2-player head-to-head mode, but you'll be constructing spires to take down your enemies and then using your heroes to do a little bit more board manipulation as you have more control over them than the minions. My favorite part about this game, though, is the way that the towers upgrade and how that's tied into the endgame conditions. The game is over when somebody destroys a fortress, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So what happens is you check how many upgrades you've made on your fortress plus your remaining health, and that number is your final score, essentially. Whoever has the most wins. But during the game, you have to constantly juggle between getting powers and abilities for yourself through the form of these upgrades here, or you can build those spires to prevent yourself from being overrun by the minions. It's a great choice because do I either put out these spires to prevent people from getting to me, which is great because you have these amazing towers, that's going to protect your health, or do you invest in special powers and abilities, which are also super interesting and fun, and even head towards that endgame condition. It's a great balance and juggle between the two, and these powers and abilities are essentially different tech trees, like Headquarters here on the Uprising faction. Got to give them a shout out because they're my favorite faction in the game. But the Headquarters here has ways that you can get extra CP, which means you can summon more minions every time. You can have multiple heroes in play at the same time. I love this so much because you're able to go down each of these different paths, and every time you play, it's going to be a different path that you get to follow. So that's my number 29, Cloudspire. My number 28, number 25 last year, is Pandemic Legacy Season 0. So this is the third in the Pandemic Legacy trilogy. My order of liking them is this one is my favorite, then Pandemic Legacy Season 1, and then Season 2. But the entire trilogy is amazing. 10 out of 10 experiences, in my opinion. Now, a Legacy game is a game where you're playing multiple games after another, and you're going to have some permanent changes that affects the board. Maybe placing stickers, writing, tearing up things, but this is built on the core Pandemic framework where you have an action turn where you're going to be moving around, doing things, using special powers and abilities, and trying to complete objectives while also juggling enemy pieces. These can be in the form of cubes or, in Season 0's case, agents. And then the enemies will get a turn where they'll be spawning agents into different areas. So you're firefighting while also juggling your objectives. I'm not going to get into any of the spoilers or details or anything like that. You need to experience those yourself. The permanence between the missions is a strong point there, where you're going to be actually stickering and your progress in a mission lasts. But the thing I want to talk about particular about Season 0 that makes it shine are the incident systems. In the original game, when you had 3 pieces in a space and you needed to add a 4th one, you would cause an outbreak, which would just cause more pieces around that area to be summoned. So you could quickly get out of hand, and if you had so many happen, you'd lose instantly. In this one, though, they are going to replace that with incidents. So instead of just putting out those pieces, you draw a card from the bottom of the deck, and something will happen. You can see it on the bottom here. And this is terrifying because you have no idea what's going to happen, how it's going to affect your game state, and how it's going to affect future games. I love this tension and pressure and this uncertainty, and I think that it's an amazing addition to Season 0. So that is my number 28, Pandemic Legacy, the entire series, but Season 0 for sure. My number 27, number 19 last year, is A Feast for Odin, a worker placement game where you start each round with a grip of Vikings, and you'll send them to different spaces, and based on the number of Vikings you send, that determines the strength of the action. So you can use them all for super powerful actions or take a bunch of small little ones. But you have all of these choices, and they scale in their strength and ability level. After you collect your resources and polyomino pieces from those actions, you'll place them onto your own board, trying to fill it up as much as possible, arranging them in a way that you can earn income bonuses, and then gathering even more places to put things that you can just get even more bonuses. So it's a juggle of, am I going to take as much as I can and hopefully try to fill it up? It's a great choice every time you take something on into your civilization here, and if you can fill it or not by the end of the game. Now, my favorite part about this game, though, is the occupation system. At the start of the game, you get a single card, and you can gain more as you play that give you special powers and abilities. You have passive effects, you have one-time use effects, you have always can use effects, and then you have these, if you meet these condition effects, you get a thing. I love giving yourself little objectives as you play, special powers and abilities, and it's up to you to determine how many of these that you want to take on for yourself. There's an entire action space where you can draw these cards and play a bunch out of your hand, giving you special abilities and incentive to use the variety of action spaces that are out there. As the game continues, you're going to get even more workers, which just means you're going to get to utilize those abilities and powers even more. So that is my number 27, A Feast for Odin. My number 26 last year is Monikers. This is a party game where two different teams are going to be racing to try to guess words. Now, there's a bunch of different versions of this game, Monikers, Time's Up, Fishbowl, but this is the one that's most popularized, and I love the way that the cards actually show the information. So for example, Bob Ross here, it says here a huge blurb of who Bob Ross is, which means that everybody can be in on it, even if they're not sure what this character is. So as you play the game, you're going to be playing in rounds, and each round is using the same stack of cards that will be chosen by the players, a couple of cards each at the start of the experience. So you'll use that same deck for every single round, trying to get people to guess this name. But that leads to my favorite part about this game is the round structure and the way that it leads to an in-game meta. So for example, let's say that Count Chocula and She-Hulk and Magic Mike are all in this deck of cards. In the first round, you're able to give whatever clues you want. You can act, you can say whatever, as long as you don't say the word on the card. So don't say Count Chocula, just make sure that they get it. Once you get it, you take it out of the deck, you score points for it, you move on to the next card. You only got a limited amount of time to do so, though. Once that deck is depleted, then you move to the next round where you're only allowed to give one-word hints, and then you move to the next round, which means you're only allowed to do charades, and then the next round where you're only allowed to do charades with your hands, and then the next round where you're only allowed to do charades but underneath a sheet. This is crazy to think that you could potentially guess what these things are, but because of this in-game meta that is developing, somebody is going to say something about Count Chocula, or maybe they do something goofy, or maybe they do a weird phrase or action, and all of a sudden that translates to something silly with your hands, and it translates, it works, and it brings this group inside joke that happens in a single session. Monikers finds a way to create a raucous experience and jokes that will last far long after your session ends. So that is my number 26, Monikers. My number 25, number 27 last year is Glenmore 2 Chronicles. This is a tile placement game where you're playing as Scottish clans. You'll be using that path mechanism that we saw in Wonderland's War as you're collecting tiles and placing them into your own area. Whenever you place a tile, though, you get to trigger its bonuses as well as all of the bonuses of the things around it. So you're constantly taking tiles, getting stuff, and wanting to move your characters around so that you can position those tiles into high bonus areas. At the end of every round, once a tile has been depleted, you'll score for 4 different scoring criteria, so you're juggling these different scoring conditions and the timing of the entire experience. Now, my favorite part about this game, aside from that core framework that's just so gratifying as you're just always getting stuff, is the way that they integrate the namesake, the Chronicles expansion. So this expansion is the Boat Race Chronicle, and that means that you're adding a couple of tiles, the ship tokens, as well as these pickup harbor tokens that you can collect along the way, and it's just put onto that core system. And I love this so much because it adds an entire new layer to the experience, things that will change the implications of the values of your other cards. For example, in the boat race here, this little movement symbol in the original allows you to move your people, which is great because you can use that for placing tiles and getting bonuses and spreading out your clan. But now in the boat race, this tile also means that you can move your boat, and that boat is an actual race, and it travels between all of the different players' boards. You can see here they travel on the water spaces. So now you have a bigger implication for the movement, which increases your likingness of, hey, I want to grab that tile and put it in my city. But it also means that the river tiles, the water areas, are also going to be more valuable. If you can place those in your area, you're extending the track that everybody has to travel on. This is such an amazing concept, and the fact that they fit so seamlessly, and this is just the first Chronicle, is incredible. I think I like every single Chronicle except 2 so far. It's a pretty big hit when there are 14 different Chronicles. So I've played them all, so I shouldn't say so far. I've played them all, and I think that 12 out of the 14 are incredible. So that is the Glenmore 2 Chronicles, my number 25. My number 24 is For Sale. This is an auctioning game, small filler game that's divided into 2 halves. In the first half, you're going to be using your cash in order to bid for these different cards. And after you collect your cards, in the second half, you'll be using those cards in order to fight for values. You put them face down, and then you reveal them. Whoever's got the highest number takes the biggest value. Now, you pretty much know how to play the game. Use your cash to get the cards, and use the cards to get the money. So you're trying to house flip. So it's a theme that a lot of people can understand, grip to, but the decision space is huge, which is crazy to me, and it's such a simple design. Now, my favorite part about this game, though, is the 2-half system. I love that you're juggling your decisions here and trying to play these 2 different games that interweave so perfectly. You've got that limited amount of cash during this auction phase, which is brilliant because once you commit to an auction, you are committed, and even if you drop out, just like when you buy a real house, you lose a bunch of stuff in the fees, so you lose half of the money that you spent rounded up, and it's terrible. It feels so bad, but sometimes you have to do it if the margin is pretty big. Like here, 2 to a 16, that's a huge margin. Are you going to drop out and take that 2 and let the next person take a 16? Ooh, it hurts. And then when you get to that next round, it's about playing your cards correctly, but not necessarily correctly to the game state, but to the players and trying to predict what they're doing. This is such an amazing juggling of these 2 different phases. The fact they blend so well, a theme that anybody can appreciate and understand. That is my number 24. Number 16 last year, that is For Sale. My number 23, number 17 last year, is Deception Murder in Hong Kong. This is a social deduction game where you play as detectives in Hong Kong. There's been a murder and it's one of your own, so it's up to the forensic scientist to point you in the right direction. So the forensic scientist player is going to be revealing tiles, and each tile is going to be put a bullet token on it, and that's going to determine what sort of information you're giving to the good team. So that's going to be something like the cause of death, the location, and as you draw these tiles, you'll have random ones, things like the motive, things like the attitude of the killer, the way that the body looked, the noise that was at the area. So these are going to give you a picture and an idea of what actually happened at this crime scene. And this is going to give you clues to figure out the murder weapon and the evidence that the murderer used. And that's what these red and blue cards here that each player is going to have in front of them. So for example, you may be the person here with an axe and you chose a diamond. So the forensic scientist is going to hopefully be able to point you in that right direction. And then the detectives have to, with that info, figure out if it's you or not. My favorite part about this game, though, is the arc of the experience and how engaged you are the entire time. As mentioned before, you're going to have evidence and a murder weapon in front of you, and the murderer picks one of those 2 things at the start of the game. But right from the very first turn, once that first clue is given, you immediately have something to go off of. You're saying, oh, okay, this person was poisoned. Let's look at the board. Okay, there's mercury over there. There's alcohol over there. There is poison gas over there. So it could be any of these 3. And then once new things come out, you're starting to explain what's going on. You're trying to make sure that all of these worlds exist. And if you think that you know what it is, you throw down your badge and you're ready to make a guess. You can wait till the entire experience. Once you're chosen, maybe you can move it off. And there are even roles that have insider information. So there's this big meta experience of what accusations are happening and when. I love that there's always a way to puzzle what's going out. And when the entire game is over, the forensic scientists can paint their picture as to what sort of experience they were creating with the tiles that they had revealed. So that is my number 23, Deception Murder in Hong Kong. My number 22, number 18 last year, is Underwater Cities. This is a worker placement game where you're going to be building habitats for humanity under the ocean. You'll do this through placement of workers, pairing that with card play, and then building out buildings as well as tunnels, small little buildings, and producing tons of resources during income phases, and doing that to propel yourself to score the most victory points. Now, my favorite part about this game, though, is the card system. This is one of my favorite things, period, in games when you're using cards constantly, and this does it perfectly. Every time that you send a worker to a space, based on the color of the space you go to, it determines the strength of the action. If you go to a green space, space, the action stinks. If you go to a yellow space, it's an amazing action. If you go to the red one, it's just okay. But you get to play a card that matches the color when you go there, and they work inversely. The yellow cards are garbage because the yellow spaces are amazing. The green cards are amazing, but the green spaces are garbage. And the red cards are just alright, and the red space is alright. So it's great. You're going to be playing cards constantly, trying to combo your different moves and deciding, is it worth playing this card to take that action? When you get that perfect pairing of card and action, it feels so good, and you're trying to set yourself up for this combination to happen. You have a hand size of 3, and you're discarding down at the start of each of your turns, so you're planning always on other people's turns as to what paths you're taking, and then when you do get additional card draw through effects, you're sort of making your plan for the next couple of turns, maybe juggling one of each color so that you have something to play at each place, or maybe you're ignoring some of these cards in your hand because you just don't like them that much in order to maximize the actions you're taking on the board. I love that push and pull and the constant use of cards, putting them in front of you. You have instant effects, you have endgame scoring, continuous effects, action cards that you can reuse throughout the experience. There's an amazing design space here, and I think that Underwater Cities has done it splendidly. So that is my number 22, Underwater Cities. Closing off this section of this list, my number 21, number 23 last year, is Nemesis. This is Aliens, the board game. You play as the crew of the Nemesis who have woken up from cryosleep to see that one of your crewmates is dead. It's up to you to complete your objectives, either your own personal goal or a corporate goal, and then do so by exploring the ship and surviving these terrible alien atrocities. So you're going to be doing this through an action card system as you play cards in order to move around, shoot things, or you even have actions that are printed on the card. Every single area that you visit is going to be thematic. It's going to make sense in the context of the ship and the world itself, and you're doing your best to either work together or betray your enemies to complete your own personal goal. All you got to do is survive and do your goal, and you win the experience. My favorite part about Nemesis, though, is that core action system of using cards in order to take actions. At the start of each round, you draw 5 cards, and then those cards can be used for basic actions, or there are actions printed on the cards. And each character has some thematic cards as to how they work. For example, the captain has a way that they can reload their weapon, which is insane because not a lot of other characters can do that. Or the engineer has ways that they can repair things more easily, or climb through the technical corridors, the vents, and they can zip around the board. You've got the pilot, who of course is going to be great at navigating the ship. And each of the characters from the expansions as well have their own unique decks and skill sets, and it ramps up even further in Lockdown, the standalone sequel, where the characters have even more in-depth character decks that are powerful to match the strength of the enemies and the situation in general for Lockdown. My strongest recommendation for Nemesis is this core experience still. I think that it gives you the most openness and freedom as opposed to some of the other expansions, but all of the expansion content for Nemesis is amazing. I honestly rank it all 10 out of 10s. I think the experience is something that you're going to come back to try to see how your different characters interact with the different aliens, and even in Nemesis Lockdown, the new base with actually being in Mars and having these characters that are super strong but evil, and objectives that are difficult in order to balance that. So that is my number 21. Number 23 last year, that is Nemesis. And that's it. Those are games 30 through 21 from the best board games of all time. Let's quickly go into a reflection and talk about all of the games that changed, things that were new to the list, etc. Starting off with the new to the list games, we have just one this time, and that is Wonderland's War. Super impressed with this design. It takes all of the things that I love from other games, where you're gaining abilities and immediately using that abilities and tying that into bag building, which is a lot of fun. Impressed with this one and excited for the expansions, as well as the updated rule sets and abilities for the Jabberwock and the Mad Hatter to hopefully balance out those factions a little bit more. I was also really surprised at the 2-player count for Wonderland's War, an amazing player count that adds an extra layer of the area control with how to construct the castles, and I think it's one that you need to check out. Doesn't matter the player count. The only thing is it doesn't play solo. Next up, we have our big movers, and there was really only one game that had a giant jump from last year, and that was Cloudspire, going from 65 up to 29. And I think the biggest reason has to do with getting to play it a lot more. I got to play this a lot this past year with my friend Dan, and he enjoys that 2-player experience as much as I do, so it was great getting to try out the different factions and sending our different units to each other. It let me experience that a lot more than I had in the prior time, because I'd only really played this game a lot in the solo, cooperative, and 4-player capacity, but getting to play it more at that 2-player count made it really shine, as it's truly you versus the other person, and you're both maneuvering. The gameplay is a lot quicker, but also exciting the entire time. Love this one. That is Cloudspire. And lastly, we'll cover the big drops in the list. Now, there weren't really that big of drops. Feast for Odin went from 19 to 27. I think that has to do with the solo mode and the fact that that's the primary way I'm playing this, and I'm not really playing it with other people. But that being said, it's super high for being primarily a solo game in my eyes. I do love that occupation system, and it's so satisfying to have this huge amount of things that you've taken on upon yourself at the start of the game and been able to complete them and cover up all those negatives by the end of the experience. The other drop here was For Sale. For Sale was number 16 last year and moved to 24. Like I said, not a huge drop, just 8 spaces, and I think that's just because some more games got into the top 10, top 16, top 20 area, so it just got pushed down because of that. But overall, I think that For Sale is still incredible, still a game that I pull out all the time. Love this one. That is For Sale, number 24 now. So that's where we'll go ahead and close off the list here. That is number 30 through 21 of my best board games of all time for 2023. I'm curious what you thought of this chunk of the list. We're getting into the 10s now. So our first 10 on this list was Pandemic Legacy at 28. So from here on out, these are my absolute favorite games. The games that I think stand above the rest, all of my 10 out of 10s. But thank you so much for watching. I'm so curious to hear what you think about these games. What's on your personal 30 through 21? Love to hear what you think. Thank you so much. SideGame Strong.